This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free slides that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com.
Porter's Five Forces model is a popular and useful framework with which to analyze industry attractiveness. Industry attractiveness refers to how easy a business will find it to make reasonable profits. And by reasonable profits we mean profits large enough to compensate investors for their risk, and also to make enough money to reinvest to keep the company successful. The first of the forces is competition or rivalry. This can range from perfect competition, where sellers have no choice as to the selling price that is charged, they are governed by the market price, all the way through to a monopoly. A monopoly gives sellers much more choice as to what price can be charged, though the price will normally alter demand. And remember, just because you have a monopoly doesn't mean you'll make profits. You might be the monopoly supplier of something nobody wants. However, by and large, the nearer an industry gets to a monopoly, the easier a time its participants will have. Therefore, provided it's legal, it could therefore be a useful strategy to take over a rival or to force it out of business by perhaps lowering prices temporarily. Now we'll look at buyer pressure. If buyers are very powerful, then they can exert pressure on prices and quality and delivery times. Selling almost all output to a few powerful buyers will be an uncomfortable situation. The more buyers you have, and the harder it is for them to switch between different suppliers, the better. Businesses should try to build in switching costs, that is, real costs or impediments that mean that buyers prefer to stay with existing suppliers. Similarly, on the other side, when you are buying goods from suppliers, if you have to buy a special component from a monopoly supplier, you will be in an uncomfortable position. That supplier can raise prices and you have to pay. Or even worse, that supplier could be taken over by one of your competitors, and then you will have no supplies at all. Ideally, firms should try to multi-source, and if they get really worried about assurance of supply, they should think about setting up their own supplies, or perhaps taking over an existing supplier. Potential entrants are sitting on the edge of the industry and may be attracted in if they can see that good profits can be made. Anything which keeps out potential entrants is known as a barrier to entry. Occasionally, potential entrants are deterred because there is a legal monopoly within the business. Sometimes regulations make it hard for potential entrants to get into a business. For example, setting up as a bank is relatively difficult because of the various regulatory authorities that have to give their permission. The need for high capital expenditure and for know-how are two other impediments to potential entrants. Substitute products arise usually by the advance of technology. Often, the appearance of substitutes will surprise a business and take it off guard. For example, landline telephone companies thought that they were almost in a monopoly position because the cost of digging up roads and laying landlines into houses, apartments and businesses would have been a considerable barrier to entry. However, then mobile telephones, cell phone technology, was invented, and good telephone coverage can be achieved with much less expense. There's not much you can do here. Once technology is invented, it can't really be sent back. Most old industries have to join the new industries as well. So now many conventional telephone companies also have mobile phone networks in an attempt to retain their overall market share in telecommunications. Whereas Pastel and Porter's Five Forces relate to influences outside the business, within the business, its culture is very important. Charles Handy defined culture as the way we do things round here. And you will be aware of the effect of culture. For example, whenever you join a new organization, whether school or college or work, you tend to go carefully for the first couple of days or couple of weeks until you see how people behave, and then you try to fit in, usually. The influences on culture can be represented by the cultural web. Starting at the top, symbols and titles. Are you in an organization with many presidents and vice presidents, where everyone has a particular title, implying that the organization might be rather formal, and where symbols might be those such as a private dining room for top managers or reserved parking spaces, or particular perks which only those of a certain grade obtain. Some organizations are quite hierarchical like that, others try to be much more egalitarian. Power relations. Do top managers keep most power to themselves, or is it dispersed? Are you told what to do, or is it more likely you'll be asked to contribute your ideas about what should be done? Organizational structure. Some organizations are what's known as tall, narrow, many layers, each layer being carefully supervised by the supervisor or manager above. Other organizations are what's known as flat, wide organizations, relatively few vertical layers, and each manager therefore having to look after a relatively large number of people. But inevitably, because they're looking after more people, people have to be better at looking after themselves. Control systems. For example, how carefully do you have to account for your time? Some organizations, perhaps for billing purposes, insist that people record what they're doing every 12 minutes. Other organizations don't control individual activities quite so closely and are more interested perhaps in the overall results. Rituals and routines. For example, some organizations, when a sale is made, the person who's made the sale has to stand up and ring a bell. Other people then applaud. To some of you this may seem childish, but those organizations which do it presumably think it's worthwhile in terms of morale boosting and challenging others who have not yet made the sale. In some organizations, you're expected to socialize, say on a Friday evening after work. Myths and stories. How the company in the past won a particular contract which was very valuable, the way in which a very clever presentation was made, or the way in which they worked hard against the clock to ensure that a job was finished on time. And finally, and very importantly, is what's known as the organizational assumption. For example, the assumption that we are the best, that we are never beaten, that we only produce work of the highest quality.